Chapter 17 of Curly by Roger Pocock. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Harari. Chapter 17. The Real Curly. Throwing back along my trail, I notice that I've mentioned a whole lot of points about Curly which made him unusual, different from other boys. Remember how he balked and shied at Holy Cross until we allowed him to hole up in a den of his own? He was sure wild, and scary of railroads, towns, or a strange house. Except with his own folks, the Balshannon outfit, and me, he was dumb as a bear, and showed wild-eyed fright when strangers spoke to him. The meanest horses went tame at a word from him. No dog ever barked at him except with tail signals of joy. Cats followed him around, and any animal who was hurt or in trouble would run to Curly for help. Even the deer knew his calls and would come quite near while he spoke to them in that low, soft voice of his. That voice never broke gruff with manhood, but just stayed sweet, like the sound of running water. He had a strong face, stern as our desert country, tanned, beautiful no end, so that one caught one's breath at the very sight of him. His smile turned me weak, his voice went through me, and I'm a sure hard case. Everybody just had to love that Curly, a born rider, a wonderful scout, a dead shot, a dangerous fighter, who bore pain like an Indian, and had heaps more sense and courage than Jim, his partner. Why do I say all this? Well, from the first, I saw that Curly youngster was undersized and weak, with a narrow chest and wide hips, more like a girl than a boy. A right proper man is strong, rough, hardy. He ought to have a temper and be master, ready to work and fight for his womenfolk. That Curly broke down and sobbed like a girl after the gunfight, and in 100 soft ways was not a proper man. There were often times when I wanted to turn in and lam his head. Then I didn't, but somehow knew that nature had played some scurvy trick on that well-meaning youngster. Well, Jim was younger than me, so there's some excuse for him. He was rough on Curly, hostile and contemptuous when the little partner acted feminine. He owned up afterwards he'd behaved like a brute to that poor, wounded, helpless critter, loving him all the while, but acting coarse. That humbled Curly, who weakened under his tongue lash, cried at times, and lay for hours sucking the wound on his arm, dumb like a dying animal. Both youngsters were surely miserable on the second and third days they lay together in prison. It was on the second morning that I sent down a doctor from Bisley to fix up Curly's wound. Late that evening, towards midnight, a crowbar dropped down through the window gap in the wall, and Jim began to labour out a hole for their escape. He dug out bricks of 'dobe one by one, and while he worked he made poor Curly sing hour after hour to hide up the sound of the crowbar. Shall I tell you one of the songs? It's a cowboy tune for smoothing the feelings of driven cattle while they bed themselves down for night. So, bossy, so, the water's handy near, the grass is plenty here, and all the stars a sparkle, because we drive no more. We drive no more. The long trail ends today, the long trail ends today. The punchers go to play, and all you weary cattle may sleep in peace for sure. Sleep, sleep for sure. The moon can't bite you here, nor punchers fright you here, and you all will be beef before we need you any more. We need you more. When morning broke, Jim piled hay on the burrow he'd made in the foot of the wall and lay on top, dead weary to get some sleep. At 10 o'clock the doctor from Bisley found Curly still singing, light‐headed, talking nonsense. The patient said he was a bear, so the doctor gave sleep medicine and sat beside him. At noon he fed the boys their dinner and went away, But they didn't wake again until supper time, when the man on guard came in. "What's for supper?" says Curly. "Tortillas, frijoles, coffee, same as usual." "Eat it," says Curly, "'cause I'm only a bear holed up for winter. We don't eat in winter anyways." "Bears have their coffee," says Jim. "Oh, yes, of course," and Curly fed coffee to the winter bear. That cleared his head, and he sat up watching Jim at work on the little round dishes. The food was frijoles, the same being beans, and tortillas, which is a thin corn cake, pretty much the same as brown fly papers, warm and damp, but sort of uninteresting to taste. The coffee was in a brown earthen pot, fresh from the fire, and mighty encouraging. Those three things make the proper feed for Mexicans, the same being simple, uninstructed people, knowing no better. When they feast, they make a stew of red pepper, and take a little meat with it, but that dish is a luxury, and hot enough to burn a hole through a brick. When Jim had eaten everything in sight, he started cigarettes, listening to a banjo in the guardroom, and a growing hum of talk, and the click of cups, for some Holy Cross riders were there with a jar of cactus spirit, a deck of cards, and other inducements sent in by Captain McCalmont. Jim heard them talking war because they'd never been paid off at Holy Cross, and had 6 months' wages coming. They allowed that El Chico, their young patrone, ought to hang, and the guards agreed that such was probable. To morrow the prisoners were going to be collected by the United States authorities for trial. Jim looked at his partner for comfort, but saw big tears rolling down Curly's face. "You ought to be ashamed of that," says he. "It can't be helped." Curly swept his arm across his face. "You, Jim, we've got to part to night." "You wild ass of the desert, what's the matter now?" "You're going through that hole to find yo' liberty, but I'll stay here." "Stay, and be hanged to you." "I got to. How should I be with this wound out there on the range?" "I'll see to that, youngster. It's only a little way to La Soledad, and I'll get you through. It may hurt, but it's not so bad as being hanged." "I can't travel. We're due to be caught and killed. You go alone, Jim." "We go together and live, or we stay together and die. Take your choice, Curly." "Oh, I can't bear it. You don't understand." "I understand you're a little coward." "That's no dream." "You own to being a coward?" "Yes. All these years I've tried to play the game, to be a boy, to live a boy's life, but now I'd rather die, and get it finished." "Why?" "I've been off my head last night and all to day. This pain has stampeded me, and I'm going crazy. To night the pain is worse. I'll be making fool talk, giving myself away, and you'll find me out. It's better to own up than to be found out." "To own up what?" "Oh, don't be hard on me, Jim. I tried so hard. I was born for a boy. I had to be a boy. Don't you see? Girls was plumb impossible in a gang of robbers." "Have you gone mad?" "Oh, you can't understand, and it's so hard to say." Curly lay face downwards, hiding a shamed face. "My mother must have made a mistake. I wasn't bawn for a boy." "Good gracious!" "I had to be raised for a boy. It had to be done. What else was possible at the Robbers' Roost?" "And you're not a boy?" "God help me, I'm only a girl." "You a girl?" "Oh, don't be hard on me. It ain't my fault. I tried so hard to be a man, but I'm crazy with pain, and I wished I was dead." "But I can't believe it can't be true. Why, I've seen you ride. The first horseman in Arizona, scout, cowboy, desperado, wanted for robbery and murder. You a girl?" "Have pity. Don't talk like that. I'm not so bad as you think. I never robbed. I never You killed men to save my life. Oh, Curly, I'm so sorry I talked like that. I take it all back. I must have been loco to call you a coward. I wish I'd half your courage. I never knew a woman could be brave. My mother wasn't, and all the girls I've known, they weren't like you. Oh, the things you've seen me do, the things I've said. Treating you no better than a boy. Can you ever forgive the way I treated you?" One little hand stole out and touched him. "Stop. Talk no more." A vaquero was singing for all he was worth in the guard room, to the strum of a guitar, while hands clapped out the time. "I could not be so well content, so sure of thee, Señorita Lolita, but well I know thou must relent and come to me, Lolita." Jim set to work to finish his hole in the wall, prying out the 'dobe bricks with his crowbar, and he sure wrought furious, timing his strokes to the clapping hands, the guitar, and the swinging chorus. "The caballeros throng to see thy laughing face, Señorita Lolita, but well I know thy heart's for me, thy charm, thy grace, Lolita. I ride the range for thy dear sake, to earn the gold, Señorita Lolita, and steal the gringo's cows to make a ranch to hold, Lolita." The cactus liquor was getting in its work. The guard room crowded up all it would hold of soldiers, vaqueros, customs men, travellers. Then there was dancing, singing, gambling, squabbling, all the row which belongs to a general drunk. Curly was fretted up to high fever, riding herd on a bunch of dream cows, and Jim was pouring in his strength on the 'dobe bricks. At 2 in the morning the Frontier Guards began to make war talk, wanting to turn the prisoners loose, with a prize for the soldier who got first kill with a gun. On that the Holy Cross vaqueros proposed to rescue their young patrone, and wipe out the Frontier Guards. There was considerable rough house with knife and gun, until the guards subdued the vaqueros, jumped on their heads, and herded them into No. 2 cell as prisoners of war. The vaqueros were just moaning for blood. The guards turned loose to celebrate their victory with more drinks. And while the row was enough to drown artillery, Jim's crowbar drove a brick which fell outside the wall. Now he had only to pry dobies loose one by one until the hole was big enough to let out prisoners. Sometimes he had to quit and hold his breath while the sentry came reeling past along his beat. Once he had to play dead, because a drunken sergeant rolled into the cell to give him a drink of miso. The sergeant called him brother, hugged him, kissed him, cried, and went away. At 3 o'clock Jim crawled out through the hole with his crowbar, laid for the sentry, jumped up behind, clubbed him, and got the rifle. Then he dragged Mr. Sentry into the cell, wrapped him in Curly's blanket, and made up a dummy to look like himself, in case the sergeant of the guard should remember to call again. "Curly," he shook his partner out of sleep, "Curly, the springtime is coming. It's time for little bears to come out of hole." "You gone all foolish," says Curly, calling me a bear. "I done forgot who I am, but I'm too sure sick to be a bear." "Let's play bear," says Jim, mighty shy. "I'll bet you I'm first through this hole." The guard's room had gone quiet, the men there being just sober enough not to fall off the floor, but the sergeant was droning with the guitar, sobbing up the tail end of the old Lolita song. "I ride the range for thy dear sake, to win the gold, Sarita Lolita, to steal the gringo's cow. Curly was first out through the hole, chasing dream bears. "The wind's in the west," she said, looking at the big stars above. "Crawl up the wind," Jim whispered. "We want our horses. Where are they?" Curly sat up snuffing at the wind, then pointed. "The hawss smells thar," she said, "but there's a scent of pony soldiers too. many soldiers. Jim trailed over Catfoot to the stable, and looked in through the door. A lantern hung in the place, and some of the Frontier Guards sat round a box on the hay, gambling earnest. If he went off to a distance, and handed out a few shots to draw the guard away searching, he reckoned there might be time to sneak round and steal a horse before they began to stray back. But then there was Curly, all delirious with fever, and whimpering small wolf calls, so that every dog in the place had started to bark. The wolf calls had to be stopped, and a new dream started which would keep the little partner good and silent. That is why Jim took a handful of dust, which he said was salt. "Come along, Curly," he whispered. "We're going to stalk the buffalo, to still hunt the buffalo. We must be fearfully quiet, or we'll never put the salt on their tails. Don't you see?" "But the buffalo's all gone extinct." "Oh, that's all right. It's not their fault, poor things. Come on, and we'll salt their tails." "I'm sort of tired," says Curly right out loud, and Jim went cold with fright. He could hear the soldiers squabbling over their game not 50 feet away, then the sound of somebody's footsteps rambling over from the guard house. A soldier staggered drunk within 2 yards of him, and rolled in at the stable door. "Come on, old chap," Jim whispered. "I'm your horse, so climb on my back, and we'll travel." So he put the little partner on his back, and staggered away into the desert. He had one cartridge in the gun, no water, only the stars to guide him, and at sunrise the Frontier Guards would see his tracks. There was no hope. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Curly by Roger Pocock. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Roy. Chapter 18. The White Star. As soon as Captain McCalmont was clear of the city, I meandered in a casual way around the saloons, taking a drink here, a cigar there, passing the word for a meeting of cowboys only. They were to ride out by 2s and 3s for home, in the usual way, but the time for the meeting was sunset, and the place a slope of hillside beyond Balshannon's grave. There we gathered to the number of 30 head, and Mutiny rode into the bunch to cut out any strangers who might have strayed with the herd. There being no strays, I spoke. "Boys, you all knows who was buried here on the hilltop. He was my friend, and a sure friend of all rangemen." Some of the boys uncovered. One called, "Spit it out, old Chalkeye. When you starts up yo' church, rent me a stall." "I'll hire yo' ruddy scalp," says I, "instead of lamps." "Well, boys, these town toughs has shot out El Señor Don, and they're proposing to play their pure fountain of law on 2 more of our tribe, the same being young Jim, his son, and little Curly McCalmont. Say, Chalkeye, when do you get yo' dividends from Misters Robbers, Roost and Company?" "Why, Buck, it's on them days when I trust you with loans of money." The crowd knew Buck's habit of not paying his debts, and proposed to divide up his shirt and pants if he got too obvious with remarks. "Boys," I went on, "we've been letting these town citizens get too much happy and animated, throwing dirt in our face. Why, here's down East newspapers sobbing obituary notices over the poor cowboy species departed. Seems that we all, and the mammoth, and the dodo, and the bison is numbered with the past, and our bones is used to manure the crops of the industrious farmer. Does that splash you? Dear departed, I appeals to you most sorrowful. Ain't it time to show signs of being alive? Not being a worker of miracles, I don't aim to corrupt your morals. I ain't proposing to obliterate the town which provides us with our liquor and groceries. I ain't a party to acts of violence. But I do propose that we just whirl in to night and rescue them po' kids at La Morita. Of course, in busting the calaboose we may have to shoot up a few Mexicans, but it does them good to be taken serious at times, and they'd sure hate to be ignored while we stole their captives." Mutiny called out, "Say now, you got yo' tail up, you ain't forgetting to talk." And on that the boys got riotous. "Rear up some more, old Chalkeye. Let's see you paw the moon." "You tell the lies, we'll stick to 'em." "Who stole Ryan's cows, Chalkeye?" "Let the old horse thief turn his wolf loose." "Ki yi yow yow! Loo loo loo! Yip yow!" "Girls," says I, "you're getting plenty obstreperous. Come on, let's roll our tails for old Mexico." The boys came yelping, and we trotted the night through, throwing the miles behind us. At 3 o'clock, to judge by the stars of Orion, we rested our ponies near the boundary at the streak of dawn loped on, and just as the day broke, hurricaned in a gun blaze down on La Morita. I regret to state for your information that the Mexican Frontier Guards were too sleepy to play up their side of the game, but surrendered abject before they had time to get hurt. Moreover, our youngsters had vamoosed through a hole in the wall, so there were no captives to liberate, except 4 measly vaqueros, which gave us a red hot cussing at being waked too early for coffee time. We had a sickening, miserable picnic, a waste of sweat and oratory. Slow and solemn we jailed up those soldiers in the calaboose, and mounted the sulky vaqueros for a guard to hold them, feeling all the time like a batch of widows. In the stable I found Curly's buckskin mare and my fool horse Jones, the pair of which I took when we started for home. As to Jim and Curly, we held a council smoke, debating on their fate. The crowd agreed that these kids had been my pupils, and would be sure horse thieves naturally. I felt they had gone afoot, but scouting around I failed to find their sign. There was a track of a man with cowboy heels going east, but it seemed to wiggle drunk. I never thought of Jim rolling along as he did with Curly on his back, but searched for the tracks of the pair running side by side. If I had only been a better scout, I might have understood the lone track, and followed with horses to mount my youngsters for flight. We could have made an easy escape from the country, ending all our troubles, but I was a fool. So soon as my tribe pulled out for home, I knew that the Frontier Guards would be loose at once like burned out hornets. To linger in their way would be unhealthy, and I had no tracks to follow anyway. So I pulled out with the rest, taking all guns and horses, leaving the guards disarmed and afoot, lest they should try to act warlike. Further north the guns were thrown away, except some retained as mementos, and we used the Mexican herd of ponies to cover our tracks where we scattered. This episode is alluded to by the foolish cowboys as Chalkeye's victory, all talk and run. A couple of miles to the eastward of La Morita, Jim found that his little partner weighed a ton. After working all night and struggling to the limit of his strength, he could go no further. The day was breaking. To move by daylight meant an extra risk of being seen, and there was nothing to be gained by travelling. So he staggered to the nearest hilltop, found a good lookout point, then smashed up some local rattlesnakes, and laid Curly to rest under a sheltering rock. From there he watched what the weekly obituary described as an infamous outrage perpetrated at La Morita by a gang of cowardly ruffians. Not that Jim was shocked. Indeed, I reckon the lad put up signs of depraved joy. He said to the little partner, "We're sure saved, Curly, from being tracked down by the guards and murdered. I calculate that one ordinary Arizona day without food and water would have finished Curly, but as it happened this was a desert Sabbath, when the clouds had a round up for prayer. I ain't religious, It's no use for a poor devil like me to make a bluff at being holy, and if I went to church the big spirit would say, 'Look at this chalk eyed person playing up at me in a boiled shirt. Ain't this plumb ridiculous?' It's no use, because I'm bad, but yet it humbles me down low to watch the clouds when they herd together for prayers, flirting their angel wings against the sun, lifting their gruff voices in supplication, tearing up the sky with their lightnings, sending down the rain of mercy to us poor desert creatures. The respectable people hire preachers to tell the big spirit of their wants, but it's the white clouds of the sky that says prayers for us ignorant range folks, for the coyotes, the deer and panthers, the bears and cows, the ponies and the cowboys. Then the rain comes to save us from dying of thirst, and we cusses around ungrateful because it makes us wet. When the storm broke that morning, the rain roared, the ground splashed, the hills ran cataracts, and Jim and Curly got washed out of their camp, the same becoming a pool all of a sudden, and were much too wet to go to sleep again. Moreover, the fever had left off prancing around in Curly's brain, and the cold had eased her wound like some big medicine. Jim had found a corner under the rock ledge, which was perfectly dry. His leather Mexican clothes were shrunk tight with rain, the staining ran in streaks on his face, his teeth played tunes with the cold. "El Señor Don Santiago," says Curly, "yo' face has all gone pinto, and it don't look Mexican that away in stripes. Maybe you're changing into a sort of half breed." "I'm beastly cold," says Jim, grave as a funeral. "Same here," she laughed. "Don't you think yo' disguise would pass for something in the way of striped squirrels? With a rat in yo' paws you'd do for a chipmunk." "Let me be," says Jim. "How's your wound?" "Not aching to hurt, just to remind me it's there. How did we get to this rock?" Jim told her about the escape, and how the Frontier Guards had been left afoot, and how the storm had come convenient to wash out the raiders' tracks as well as his own. The rain had quit, and the plain was shining like a sea of gold which ran in channels between the island groups of purple mountains. So one could sure see range after range melting off into more than 100 miles of clear distance, to where the sunshine was hot beyond the clouds. That clearness after rain is a great wonder to see, and makes one feel very good. "Talk some more," says Curly, "then I won't be encouraging this wound by taking notice of it." "Shall I lift you here to this dry corner?" "No, it's sure fighting, moving. Let me be. Curly, how did you get that scar above your eye? Buck handed me that. He's shorely fretful at times." "Who's Buck?" "Why, he's second in command of our gang. No, he's a sure man. I'm plenty fond of Buck." "The brute, I'll wring his beastly neck. You love him?" "Wouldn't you love all yo' brothers, Jim?" "Oh, brothers, that's all right. But why did the rotten coward make that scar?" "You see, Buck's plenty fond of me, and his emotions is rare and high, 'specially when I refused to be Mrs. Buck. It sounded so funny that I had to laugh. Then he got bucking, squealing crazy, and when he's feeling that a way he throws knives, which it's careless of him." "He wounded you with the knife? The cur!" "Oh, but Buck was remorseful a whole lot afterwards, and father shot him too. Father always shoots when the boys get intimate. Poor Buck, I nursed him until he was able to get around again, and he loves me worse than ever. It can't be helped." "So these robbers know that you're a girl?" "They found me out last year. Yes, it's at the back of their heads that I'm their lil' sister, and they're allowed to be brothers to me, Jim. Now don't you snort like a hawss, 'cause they're all the brothers I've got." "You're not afraid of them?" "You can't think what nice boys they are. Of course, being robbers, they claims to have been hatched savage, and brung up dangerous. poor things. Father tells him that they has no occasion for vainglorious pride, 'cause their vocation is mean. He's dead right, and I'm glad he shoots them, generally in the legs. He says he reckons that a tender inducement to being good is better than a bullet through the eye. Of course, thar has to be some discipline to chasten their hearts, or they'd get acting bumptious. But you don't savvy, father has to press his views on the boys, but they'd be much worse if it wasn't for him. He says he's a heaps indulgent parent to 'em, and I reckon he shorely is. Father's the best man in the whole world. Do you know he only kills when he has to, and not for his own honour and glory? Why, he won't rob a man unless he's got lots of wealth. Once he was a bad man, but that's a long while ago, before I remember." "Were you always raised as a boy?" "Allus. He made me learn to ride and rope and shoot from ever since I was weaned. When I got old enough he learned me scouting, cooking, packing a hawss, tending wounds, hunting, all sorts of things. I've been well educated sure enough, more than most boys." "It's all beastly rot calling him good. McCalmont good. A hawss or a dawg or a little child will run from a bad man, but they love my father. Oh, but you don't know how good he is." "Well, let it go at that. You wanted to be a robber?" "Shorely, yes, but he never would let me. It ain't true what that sign paper says up in the city yonder, that I robbed a train. I wasn't there at all. You see, father picked up on the home trail with a starving man, and helped him. That mean, or'nary cuss went and told Joe Beef, the sheriff, that I was in the gang which held up the train. That's why I'm due to be hunted and roped, or shot at by any citizen who wants $2,000. Of course, it's natural there should be a bounty offered on wolf haids, but I'd like to have a nice wolf time before I'm killed. I never had a chance to get my teeth in, except only once. Yes, we stole 600 head of cattle from the Navajos, and you should just have seen the eager way they put out after us. They was plenty enthusiastic, and they came mighty near collecting our wigs." "It makes me sick to think of you with a gang of thieves." "Father says that the worst crimes is cowardice, meanness, and cheating. The next worst things is banks, railroad companies, lawyers. And that young Ryan, 'specially Ryan, he says that us robbers is angels compared with trash like that." "That's no excuse." "Father says that robbery is a sign that the law is rotten, and a proof that the government's too poor and weak to cast a proper shadow. He allows we're a curse to the country, and it serves the people right." "It's bad. You know it's bad." "Sure thing it's bad. Do you know what made us bad? All of our tribe was cowboys and stockmen once, not saints, but trying to act honest, and only stealing cows quite moderate, like old Chalkeye. Then rich men came stealing our water holes, fencing in our grass, driving our cattle away." "Why didn't you get a lawyer? Wasn't there any law?" "There surely was. My father's farm was way back in Kansas. His neighbour was a big cattle company, which hadn't any use for farms or settlers. They turned their cattle into his crops, they shot my brother Bill, they wounded father. Then father went to law, and the lawyer skinned him alive, and the judge was a shareholder in the Thomas Cattle Company. He done gave judgment that we all was in the wrong. Then father appealed to the big court at Washington, which says he had the right to his land and home. So the cattle company set the grass on fire, and burned our home. Mother was burned to death, and father he went bad. I was the only thing he saved from the fire." "Poor beggar. No wonder he turned robber. I'd have done the same, by Jove." "He shot Judge Thompson first, then he killed Mose Thompson, and the sheriff put out to get him." "He got the sheriff?" Then he went all through Kansas and Colorado, gathering poor stockmen that had been robbed and ruined by the rich men's law. They held up pay escorts, stage coaches, banks, the trains on the railroad. That was the beginning of the robbers' roost. Jim sat heaps thoughtful, looking away across the desert. "Our breeding cattle," says he, tallying on his fingers. "Then Holy Cross, then mother, then father, and now I'm being hunted for a murder I didn't commit." "Now you know," says Curly, "why we robbers played a hand in yo' game." "I understand. Say, Curly, I take back all I said about it being bad. This robbery under arms. It's the only thing to do." "Don't you get dreaming," says Curly. "We all ain't blind. Our eyes is open a whole lot wide to truth, and we make no bluff that robbery and murder is forms of holiness." "It's all right for me. I'm a man, and I'm not a coward either. But, Curly, you're not fit for a game like this. I'm going to take you away, where you'll be safe." "And whar to?" Jim looked at the desert steaming after the rain, hot as flame, reaching away all round for ever and ever. He looked at Curly's wound all swollen up, her face which had gone gaunt with pain and weakness. They were afoot, they were hunted, they had no place to hide. "Whar do you propose to take me?" says Curly. "I don't know," says Jim. "Perhaps your people aren't so bad after all. Anyway, they tried to keep you clean." "And what's the use of that? Do you think I want to be alone in the whole world? Clean with no folks, no home? Why should I want to be different from my father and all my tribe? Would I want to be safe while they're in danger? Would I want to play coward while they fight? Shucks! Father turned me out to grass onct at the Catholic mission, and them priests was shorely booked right through to heaven. What's the use of my being thar, while the rest of my tribe is in hell? I dreamt last night I was in hell, carrying water to feed it to my wolves. I couldn't get a drop for myself, never a drop." "Curly, I've got to save you. I must, I shall." She laughed at him. "You! Do you remember me at Holy Cross when I punched cows for Chalkeye? I might have been thar still but for you." "What on earth do you mean?" "Jim, I met up with yo' mother, and I didn't want to be bad any more when I seen her." "She thought the world of you." The poor child broke out laughing. "Oh, shucks!" Then her face went bitter. "She said she loved me, eh?" "She said I was a beastly little cad compared with you. When I got home from college she held you up for a holy example, and rubbed my nose in it. She was right. But how I cursed you!" Curly laughed faint and lay back moaning, for the sun had come hot from the clouds, and she was burning with pain. "So yo' mother claimed she loved me. Well, I know better." "Why didn't you stay with her, Curly?" "I seen her face when she waited for you to come home, you, Jim, and she looked sure hungry. What was I to her when she seen her own son a coming? I waited to see you, Jim. I jest had to see you, 'cause you was pison to me. Then I went away, 'cause I'd have killed you if I'd seen you any more." "Where did you go?" "Whar I belong, back to the wolf pack. What had I to do with a home, and a mother, with shelter, and living safe, and being loved? I'm only a wolf with a bounty on my hide to be hunted down and shot." "And you a girl?" "No, a mistake." Jim pawed out and grabbed her small brown hand. "You came back," he whispered. "I came back to see you. If that Ryan was going to wipe you out, you and your people, I came to see you die." "And save my life." "I reckon," says Curly, "I ain't quite responsible anyways for my life, 'cause I'm only a mistake, jest a mistake. I feels one way and acts the contrary. I whirl in to kill and has to rescue. I aims to hate, and instead of that I " "What?" "I don't know," she laughed. Up home at Robert's Roost we got a little book on etiquette what tells you how ladies and gentlemen had ought to act in heaps big difficulties. It shorely worries me to know whether I'm a lady or a gentleman, but it's mighty comforting the way that book is wrote. I done broke all my wools out of that book to set up their tails and act pretty. Now, if I had the book, I'd know how I'd ought to act in regard to y'all." Jim looked mighty solemn, being naturally about as humorous as a funeral. "Am I nothing to you?" he asked, feeling hurt. But she just opened one eye at him, smiling, and said nothing. Presently the pain got so bad that she began to roll from side to side, scratching with her free hand at the face of the rock overhead. "Can't I do something?" says Jim. "It's awful to sit and watch that pain. I must do something." "If you climb to the top of this rock," she said between her teeth, "you'd see La Soledad. My father's thar." "I'll run." "Why run?" She snatched a small round looking glass out of the breast of her shirt. "You've only to get the sun on this glass and flash the light 3 times upon La Soledad. The man on lookout will see the flash." "Give me the glass, then." "No." "Why not?" "Do you know what it means, Jim, if you flash that signal?" "Rescue for you." "And for you, Jim, it means that you quit being an honest man. It means shame. It means death. Us outlaws don't die in our beds, Jim." "Give me the glass." "No, Jim. Sometime soon, when you and me is riding with the outfit, or camp at our stronghold, the army is going to come up agin us. Pony soldiers, and walk a heaps, and twice guns, to take our water holes, to drive away our remuda, to block our escape trails, to close in on us. Our fires are going to be put out, our corpses left to the coyotes and the eagles." "Give me that glass." "And my father says that beyond that is the everlasting death." "Do you think you can frighten me? Give me that glass." He snatched the glass from her hand, scrambled to the top of the rocks, and flashed the light 3 times upon La Soledad. A white star answered. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Curly by Roger Pocock. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Harari. Chapter 19. A Marriage Settlement. McCalmont was hid up at the ranchita La Soledad, with a sentry out to the southwest watching La Morita, a sentry out to the west to keep tab on the Bisley Trail, a sentry out to the north on the Grave City Road, and Buck Hennessy, his segundo, riding from point to point with feed and water. When anything happened, the sentries flashed a signal to Buck, who warned the chief. At sunrise McCalmont had news of our raid on La Morita, and that made him think for sure that the kids were rescued. He'd been riding all night, so he got his eye down quick for a big sleep. The storm rolled up, burst, and trailed off to the eastward. The sun shone out, lifting white steam from the desert. Then came the heat. At 2 o'clock, away southward through the quivering haze, Buck sighted the 3 flash signal, which means help. He threw back the 2 flash, coming. So he and the chief loped out, taking a canteen of cold tea, which is the proper medicine for thirst, and a led horse each, to bring the youngsters in to the little ranch. By 4 o'clock they had Curly bedded down in the shack, supposing herself to be a prairie dog, and wanting to know who'd come and stole her tail. McCalmont nursed her. Buck went off to spoil the trail from the hill, and Jim squatted down on the doorstep for a feed of pork and beans, with lashings of coffee. The main outfit of the robbers was camped at Las Aguas, some miles to the northeast, and 3 of them came in at dusk to get their supper and relieve the sentries around La Soledad. They were heaps shy when they saw what looked like a greaser vaquero sitting in the doorway of the cabin. One of them rode right at him. "Here, you!" he shouted. "Get out of here! Pronto, vamos!" "Poco tiempo," says Jim. "Who are you, anyways?" "Quien sabe?" "Well, you can't stay here, so you'd best get absent." He pulled his gun on Jim's feet. "Now jest you prance." Jim laughed at him. "Mañana," he said. Then in English, "You bark a lot, my friend. Whose dog are you?" Then he heard McCalmont's slow, soft drawl. "I sure enjoy to see the sire's grit shows out in the young colt. Spoke like a man, Jim. And as to you, crazy hoss, I want you to understand that if you don't learn deportment, I'll politely lam yo' head. You double dealing, fugitive, low flung, sheep herding son of a lop eared thug. Hain't you got no more sense than a tourist, you parboiled, cockeyed, spavined, broken down, knock kneed wreck of bones? You?" With such genteel introductions, McCalmont sure spouted burning wrath into that robber, scorching holes until he lost his breath. "The evil communications of this young polecat," says he to Jim, "is shorely spoiling my manners. And now you turtle doves, you'll just get away out of here and cook your supper thar by the barn. You'll want to be mighty quiet too, 'cause my Curly is lying in here wounded. Get over now." The robbers trailed off grinning, while the chief sat down on the doorstep next to Jim. "The children make me peevish," he said, and began to roll a cigarette in his fingers. "Wall, do you remember, Jim, I allowed we'd be better friends when we met again." Jim looked round sharp, and sat there studying McCalmont. He didn't look bad or dangerous, but just a middle aged cattle man of the old longhorn desert breed. "Our folks are rough and homely. We've got a hard name too, but we stay alive in a country which kills off all but the fighters." McCalmont had a cool blue eye, humorous and kind, and grey hair straggling down over a face that was tanned to leather. The stiff brimmed cowboy hat was jammed on the back of his head. The white silk handkerchief hung loose about his shoulders. He wore a grey army shirt, blue overalls stuffed anyhow into his boots, and a loose belt of cartridges, slinging the Colt revolver on his hip. Somehow the youngster felt drawn to him, knowing he'd found a friend of the kind that lasts. "And you were that sky scout?" says he. "A most unworthy shepherd. Just you look at my sheep," says McCalmont. Jim asked how long it was since they met that day on the range. "It seems a year to you, eh, lad? That was 6 days ago, the way I reckon time." "So much has happened, sir. Can it be less than a week? I was only a boy then. And Curly?" "My son has struck you serious." "She has told me everything, sir." "You're going to remember to speak of Curly as a boy. He is alluded to as a boy, or I get hostile. You understand that?" "I understand." "And now," says McCalmont, "we'll have that buckboard ready in case we need to pull out." There was a buckboard standing in the yard, the same being a four-wheel dog trap, with a springy floor of boards, easy for travel. Jim helped McCalmont to stow some cases and a keg of water, fill sacks with sweet range hay for Curly's bed, and then cover the whole with canvas ground sheep. "You think," says Jim, "that we'll be chased to night?" "I dunno, Jim, but it looks to me as that's how the herd is grazing." When supper was ready, they strayed across to the fire, and joined issue with beef, hot bread, and coffee, the same being taken serious without waste of time or talk. We range folks don't interrupt our teeth with aimless discourse. By smoke time Buck loped off in the dusk to find the remuda of ponies out at grass, and the boys had a cigarette while he gathered, watered, and drove the ponies home. Then the team for the buckboard was caught, harnessed, and tied up with a feed of corn. Each man roped and saddled his night horse, and Buck with the three relief men, rode out slow, curving away into the starlight. McCalmont roped a sorrel mare for Jim, then found him a spare saddle, a bridle, a blanket, belt, gun, and spurs. "Now," says he, "jest bed yo'self down, but don't undress. Keep yo' hawss to hand, sleep rapid, and in case of alarm jump quick. An outlaw's bed, my son, ain't feathered for long sleeps." Jim lay awake and watched until the day guard came loping in with Buck. He saw them rope and saddle their remounts, catch their supper, bed down, and smoke the final cigarette. It all felt homely and good to be with cowboys again, to have his blanket on the dust, his horse and gun beside him, to know he was free and moderately safe, to look up drowsy at a great white sky of stars. Jim was a plainsman in those days, sure enough, content, range fashion, to have the whole earth for a bed, the night for a bedroom, and the starry palace of the Great Spirit to shelter him while he slept. Kings and emperors and such have to hole up at night in mean quarters compared with that. Somewhere out on the range McCalmont's guard camp kept a sentry alert through the night, and when Jim woke up he saw the day guard swarming off in the grey of dawn to relieve them. He washed himself in the horse trough, and helped McCalmont to cook breakfast. "Now don't you make too much fire," says the chief, "'cause the less smoke we show the better for our health. We want no strangers projecting around to pay us mawning visits." "Colonel," says Jim, "how's Curly?" "Right pert, and chirping for breakfast." The boys came rolling in from night guard. "Now you crazy hoss," says McCalmont, "rope the day hawsses, and put the herd to grass before you feed. You, Buck, is all secure?" "Wall, boss, there's United States pony soldiers, 300 haid of 'em comes trailing down out of the Mule Pass." "Heading this way?" "No, seh, they're pointed for La Morita." "I see. It's because of the shocking outrage yesterday on them pore Mexican guards at La Morita. I expaict that old Mexico is up on its ear for war, and they'll be sending their army to eat the United States. Jest take yo' glasses, Buck, and see if that Mexican army is coming along." Buck rode to the nearest hill and looked over the top without showing himself on the skyline. Then he came sailing back, and rolled up to the chief, all snorting. "There's the dust of an army on the Fronteras trail." "Them rival armies," McCalmont drawled, "will talk theirselves into fits, and the rival governments will talk theirselves into fits, and all the newspapers will talk theirselves into fits. Then they'll agree that La Morita was raided, and they'll agree that it was the acts of wicked robbers, and they'll agree it was me. Suppose we have our coffee." All through the night McCalmont had been sitting up with Curly, treating her wound to a course of cold wet bandages once in 5 minutes, to reduce the swelling. After breakfast he went back again to her side, and his teeth were sure set hard, because he had made up his mind to dig for the bullet, which caused her more pain than was needful. As for Jim, he squatted on the doorstep outside, with time at last to think. His affairs had been some hurried and precipitous in this one week, which cost him his parents, his home, his business as master of a tribe of cowboys, his friends, his prospects, his reputation as an honest man. And now the whirlwind had dropped him on the doorstep of Adobe Shack to think the matter over quietly and have a look at himself. He was an orphan now, poor as a wolf, hunted, desperate, herded with thieves. What was the use of trying to earn an honest living, when the first respectable person he met would begin the conversation by shooting him all to pieces? Then he heard McCalmont calling him. "Say, can yo' lawdship oblige me with a loan of a pen?" His lordship! The poor chap remembered now that he was Viscount Balshannon, Baron Blandon, and several different sorts of baronets. "Yo' lawdship!" "McCalmont," he howled, "you brute!" Then he heard Curly telling her father to behave himself, and his mind went off grazing again over the range of his troubles. There was that Curly, the famous desperado, the fighting frontiersman, the man who had saved his life, and all of a sudden he had to think of him, of her, as a poor girl crazy with pain. Jim had to face a fact which had hit his very soul, turned the world upside down, and left him wriggling. It was no use being hostile or disappointed. He couldn't make believe he was glad. Curly didn't feel like a chum or a partner now. He couldn't imagine her as any sort of sister or friend. She just filled his life until there was nothing else to care for on earth, and it made his bones ache. Then McCalmont began to work with some sort of surgical instruments, probing her wound for the bullet. He heard her make little moans, whimpers, and stopped his ears with his fingers. Then she screamed. Jim was shaking all over, but with that scream he knew what had happened to himself. He had fallen head over ears in love with that same Curly. After a long time McCalmont came out of the shack and sat down alongside of Jim. The robber was white as a ghost. He was trembling and gulping for breath. "Here," he cried, "you take this." Jim took the thing in his hand, a flattened bullet, all torn around the edges and streaked with blood. For some time he just sat staring at that bullet, scared by his own thoughts. "Captain," says he at last, "Curly's not dying?" "Why, not to any great extent, my son." McCalmont lay back on a dirt floor and yawned. "He's sleeping a whole lot now, and if you'll stay around in case he wakes, I'll take a few myself. I'm kind of tired." The robber dropped off to sleep, and Jim sat watching beside him. At noon the boys off duty in the yard called him to dinner, but McCalmont slept far into the afternoon. Then of a sudden he started broad awake, his hand on his gun, staring out at the blazing heat of the desert. "That's all right," says he. "3 hours' rest is enough for hawsses and robbers, so I reckon I've took more'n my share." "Curly's still sleeping," says Jim. "I'll catch some lunch then." Jim watched him ranging about the yard, bread in one hand, meat in the other, eating his dinner while he hustled his men to work. He kept 3 young robbers busy until the camp gear was stowed for travel, and all the litter was hid away out of sight. Then he made them bury the ashes of the camp fire, and smooth over all the tracks until the ground looked as though there had been no visitors for a week. After that he brought a pencil and notebook for Jim. "I want you to write," he said. "Scrawl yo' worst, and put down all the spelling ignorant. Write, 'Dear Belle, I'm gone with the buckboard for grub. Back this evening. B. Brown.' Yes, that will do." He took the book from Jim, tore out the leaf, and hung it on the door conspicuous. "Thar's times," he said, "when sheriffs and marshals and posses of virtuous citizens gets out on the warpath in pursuit of robbers. They comes pointing along mighty suspicious, and reads the tracks on the ground, and notes the signs and sniffs the little smells, and in their ignorant way draws false conclusions. Meanwhile the robbers has adjourned." Jim's face was as long as a coffin. "Captain," says he, "I've been thinking." "I'm sorry you're took bad, my son." The robber sat down beside him. "Let me see yo' tongue." "Don't laugh at me. Will you mind, Captain McCalmont, if I speak of Curly, just this once, as a woman?" "Turn yo' wolf loose, my son. I'm hearing." "I love her, sir." "Same here, Jim." "Do you mind, though?" "My boy, when I wanted to marry her mother, I jest up and asked her." "I'm not good enough for her." "That's so, and yet I reckon Curly's been dead gentle with you all. Why, she sure sits on all our haids." "I'm afraid she doesn't care for me yet." "I expect, Jim, that an eye doctor is what you need." "And you'll consent?" "If Curly consents, on one condition. You get her safely out of this country. You take her to civilized life, whar she can stay good away from us thieves. Take her to the old country." "To starve?" "I'll see to that. I've left enough wealth with Chalkeye to give you a start in life. He came down yesterday mawning to see you all at La Morita. You were out." "Do you suppose," says Jim, getting hot, "that I'd take your money?" "If you take my child, you're not above taking my money, Lord Balshannon." Jim pawed his gun. "I take no stolen money." "You're speaking too loud," says McCalmont. "Come over by the corral." He walked over to the bars of the corral, Jim following. "And now," McCalmont's voice went softer than ever, "I may allude to the fact that if any cur insults my daughter or me, there is apt to be some unpleasantness." "Don't you think," says Jim, his hand on his gun, "that we had better go a little further off, so that Curly won't be disturbed when we fire?" "Why, boy, are you proposing to dispense yo' gun at me?" "As you please. You called me a cur, and you'll eat your words or fight." "And you only called me a thief? Well, I surely am for a fact. And you're not a cur. No, I reckon I was some impulsive in saying that. Come, we won't quarrel, for I like you a whole lot for yo' playing up against me that a way. What are yo' plans?" Jim was breathing hard and acting defiant still. "I want to join your gang." "Which I accepts you glad, for I ain't refusing shelter to any hunted man." "And I may marry Curly?" "Not if you join my outfit. None of my wolves are invited to offer their paws in marriage with my Curly. 2 or 3 of them young persons proposed theirselves, and found my gun a whole lot too contagious for comfort." Jim unbuckled his belt, and let it fall with holster and gun to the ground. "I cannot accept the loan of that gun," he said, "or any favour from you. I've been hunted. I'm afoot. I'm unarmed. But now, by thunder, look out for yourself, because I'm going to hunt. I shall rob you if I can. I'm at war with you and every man on the stock range, until I've won back my house, my lands, my cattle. Then I'll come for your daughter, but I won't ask for her." McCalmont leaned his shoulder against the corral and laughed at him. "Wade in," says he. "Good luck, my boy. I mustn't ask you to divulge your plans, but I'm heaps interested. My father told me, Captain McCalmont, that all the first Balshannon won he got with the sword. Well, times are changed. We use revolvers now." "Only for robbery, my lad, and for murder. I thought as you do once, and reckoned I'd get even with the world. I started with a lone gun. I sure got even, but see the price I paid. My wife was I can't talk of that. My little son was shot. My daughter is herding with thieves, and she's the only thing I've got left on earth. Come, lad, if I can bear to part with her, and give her up to you, can't you give up a little of yo' fool pride and accept her dowry just to save the child? Take her away to where she can stay good. I ask no more of you." "You want me to run away from Ryan, and let him keep Holy Cross? You want me to live in Ireland on a woman's money? You want to hire Lord Balshannon with stolen money to keep your daughter?" Jim spat on the ground. "If you want to give Curly to a filthy blackguard, why don't you marry her to Ryan?" "You use strong words, seh." "And mean them." McCalmont lowered his eyes and pawed in the dust with his foot. Just for a moment he stood scratching the dust, then he looked up. "Once," he said, very quiet, "I aimed at being a gentleman. I beg your pardon, sir." "You are a gentleman," says Jim. "That's just the worst of it. You understand things. What on earth makes you want to insult me?" "It seems to me, Jim, that you might understand, more than you do, that I'm aiming to be your friend. You're at war with this yere Ryan to get back Holy Cross, or fair equivalent, eh? for what you've lost?" "Go on, sir." "I'm at war too, with the breed of swine he belongs to. Would you be satisfied if Ryan paid in cash for your home, your land, and your cattle? You being an outlaw now, it wouldn't be healthy to live there to any great extent. Will you take cash?" "Or blood." "I have no special use for blood. I reckon I'd as soon bleed a polecat as a Ryan, if I yearned for blood." "What do you reckon you could buy with blood? Sections of peace? Chunks of joy? I'd take mine in cash." "Will you help, sir?" "For all young Ryan's worth, and then" McCalmont laid his hands on Jim's shoulders "you'll take Curly home as your wife, eh, partner?" "If she is willing, sir." McCalmont's ears went back against his head. He lifted his nose to the west, pointing upwind. There was a sound like the thud of raindrops on dust, a soft pattering which came nearer and stronger. He loosed off the long yell to rouse the three men who were resting by the barn. He told Jim to pick up his gun and help. He jumped for the team horses and led them to the buckboard. The pattering had grown up out of the distance to a steady rush of sound. The ground had begun to quiver, then to shake. Then, with a yell of warning, Buck and his sentries came thundering in from the desert. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Curly by Roger Pocock. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Harari. Chapter 20. The Marshal's Posse. McCalmont backed his team to the buckboard, lifted the wagon tongue to the ring of the yoke bar, and jumped to hitch on the traces, just as Buck reined all standing to report. "There's a strong posse," says Buck, "coming out from the Mule Pass. Maybe 60 riders, and they're shorely burning the trail straight for this ranch." "Were you seen?" "No, seh." "Bowlegs, Johnny, Steve, you're mounted, so you'll collect the herd, drive north, and keep wide of the trail. Crazy Hoss, hold this team. Doc, throw my saddle on that sorrel and lead north. Buck, make the camp search, and follow, closing all signs 'cept the wheel track. Jim, help the herders. Get a move on." McCalmont had got through with the harnessing while he slung his orders. Now he went to work smooth and quiet, pulling on his chaps, leather leg armour, and buckling his spurs while his cool eyes searched the yard. "Buck," he called, "let the water drain out of that hoss trough. That water wouldn't look natural on an empty ranch." McCalmont brought Curly in his arms, bedded her down in the rig, drew the ground sheet over to keep off the sun and dust, and passed a lashing across. After that he locked the door of the cabin, and hung the key on its nail. It was just that thoughtfulness in little plays which made McCalmont loom up great in his business. 2 minutes after the first alarm he grabbed the reins, jumped to his seat, and drove off slow from the yard, aiming to show by the tracks that Cocky Brown's old buckboard had not pulled out in a hurry. Buck and Crazy Hoss stayed to brush out a few spare tracks, put up the slip rails, and followed. For all one could see at the little ranchita, La Soledad, the owner, Cocky Brown, had trailed off for supplies to the city. Then a couple of riders had happened along shortly after, and read the notice which was left for "Dear Bill" on the door. McCalmont just poured his whip into the team as Buck came up abreast. "All set?" he asked. "All set, seh." "Can we get behind them hills before we're seen by the posse?" Buck looked back to the boys, who were sweating the herd astern. "Yes," he shouted, "I reckon. You done right smart, seh, to get Curly out in that mess. You'll be pleased to know, Buck, that my Curly is engaged to be married to this du Chesnay colt." Buck's face went white, but he just spurred along saying nothing. A fold of the ground shut out the ranch behind. A hill barred off the country to the left, and if the posse could see the dust of the flying outfit, they might well mistake that for one of the whirlwinds which curve around the desert wherever the sun burns strong. "Buck," says McCalmont, "reach back to the skyline, and see if that posse puts out on our trail from the ranch. At dusk I quit this Grave City road and strike due east. If you're delayed, just roll yo' trail right east for Holy Cross. In the mawning we round up all the stock we can find thar, and pull out for home. You understand?" "I understand," says Buck, and swung off for the skyline. The breaking out of evil passions between the cowboys and the Grave City citizens opened my eye to the fact that this city was getting a whole lot obsolete since the mines began to peter out. Its population of 12,000 assorted criminals had shrunken away to mere survivals, living to save the expense of funeral pomps. Counting in tramps, tourists, and quite a few dogs, expected visitors, and the dear departed, these ruins claimed a population of 1,000 persons, mostly escaped from penitentiary. It made me feel lonesome to think of such a tribe, with its mean ways, distorted intellects, and narrow views about me. On the other hand, there was Bisley, a sure live mining town in the Mule Pass, where the people were youthful, happy, and sympathetic. After that melancholy victory of mine at La Morita, I came butting along to Bisley, where I reckoned I could have a glass of lager beer without being shot to any great extent. Besides that, United States Marshal Hawkins lives there, who's always been a white man and a good friend to me. I found his house away up the gulch above Bisley City, and he being to home, just whirled right in, telling him how sick my heart was and how my fur was all bristles. He said he was disgusted with me for getting mixed up with local politics and robbers. Naturally, I explained how I'd only been acting as second in a duel between Balshannon and that Ryan. He agreed I was modest in the way I put my case, and that I ought to be hanged some in the public interest. "How about the robbers?" says he. "Is there robbers about?" says I. "Is thar really now?" He snapped out news of the La Morita raid that very morning, and I own up I was shocked all to pieces when he told me what had happened to those fragile guards. "Why, man," says he, "it's all your doing, and I had to wire for the doggone cavalry." "Cavalry?" says I. "Poor things! Do you reckon they'll get sore feet?" "I opine," says the Marshal, "that you'll get a sore neck soon and sudden, you double dealing, cattle stealing hoss thief. Where do you think you'll go to when you're lynched?" So he went on denouncing around until it was time to eat, then asked me to dinner. After that Mrs. Hawkins was plenty abusive too, close herding me until supper, when the Marshal came home. Hawkins, thoughtful to keep me out of mischief, made me bed down for the night in his barn, and I made no howl because here at Bisley, close to the boundary, I would get the first news of Jim and Curly. It made me sick to think how helpless I was to find them. In the morning a squadron of cavalry arrived by rail, had coffee in town, and trailed off in their harmless way to patrol the boundary for fear of somebody stealing Mexico. I lay low, but mending a sewing machine which had got the fan tods, according to Mrs. Hawkins. I treated the poor thing for inflammation of the squeam until it got so dead I couldn't put it together any more. My mind was all set on my lost kids out yonder in the desert, but Mrs. Hawkins grieved for the dead machine, and chased me out of the house. Just then came the Marshal, swift back from Bisley town on a bicycle. "Say, Chalkey," he yelled, "I want you to saddle my mare, and get mounted yourself, pronto." When I came out with the horses I found him fondling his shotgun, so I buckled on my guns and inquired for the name of my enemy. "You know Cocky Brown?" he asked, as we rode down street. "I know he makes a first rate stranger," says I. "His doggone son is here in Bisley drunk, and lets out that old Cocky is getting rent for La Soledad." "Who is the locoed tenant? Some poor tourist?" "It's that doggone McCalmont and his robbers." "And yet, Mr. Hawkins, you laid the blame on me for raiding La Morita?" "It makes me sick. For raiding La Morita? Why, of course, McCalmont's robbers, the same gang which shot up the sepulchre crowd at Grave City. That explains everything. Well, I'm sure sorry, old friend, that I laid the blame on you." "Mr. Hawkins," says I, "hadn't you better tell the pony soldiers that they're barking up the wrong tree?" "I will, and get their help in surprising that doggone McCalmont at La Soledad." "A good idea." "That was his idea, not mine, and I disown it. Suppose that Jim and Curly were hid up there at La Soledad?" "We can get them ordinary hold ups," says I indignant, "without being cluttered with a heap of military infants. Why, your half fledged molten cavalry would just get right in our way by tumbling all over theirselves." In the town we found the citizens surging around for encouraging liquors before they hit the trail. They were all bristling with pocket flasks and artillery, some on mules, some on sore back plugs from the livery stable. Besides that, there were heroes in sulkies, and dog traps, and buckboards, warriors on bicycles, and three on a pioneer motor car, which blew up with a loud explosion in front of the Turkish divan. Mixed in with that milling herd were 7 of my La Morita raiders, howling for robbers' blood and gassing about the disgracefulness of molesting frontier guards. Then they circled round a tenderfoot on a pinto horse and told him how the robbers fed red hot coals to a prisoner. "Wall, I admire," says the shorthorn. "Oh, you needn't believe me," says Lion Ike. "Ask Chalkeye here, he's truthful." "Stranger," says I, "allow me to introduce you to Mr. Lion Ike. He has an impediment in his truth, but otherwise will survive until he's lynched. Now, seh, the Marshal over yonder says that he yearns for your advice." The tenderfoot loped off joyful to teach the United States Marshal, while I spoke to my cowboys like a father. "You moth eaten bookworms," says I, "your stories is prehistoric, and your lies is relics. Now you want to encourage them poor toorists, 'cause we needs them. Toorists graze out slothful on the trail, they're noisy to warn their prey, and they flit like bats as soon as a robber shoots. Send all the tourists you can to tell good advice to Marshal Hawkins, quick. As to the real folks who can ride and shoot, beguile 'em to feed, lead 'em up against the fire water, scatter 'em, delay. This Marshal needs our help, you blighted sufferers. Do you want the Marshal to get Jim and poor Curly McCalmont, you idiots?" So we scattered to help the Marshal, sending him earnest talkers, while his fighting men went off and lost themselves. Did I act mean? I wonder sometimes whether I done right for Jim, for Curly. Doggone Hawkins was as mad as a wet hen and too hoarse for further comments when, after a couple of hours, he rode off alone to hunt robbers. So we had to follow to save the old man from being shot. I came up abreast as soon as I could, and in a voice all hushed into whispers he just invoked black saints and little red angels to comfort me on a grid. I reckon it was 4 o'clock when our circus, all hot and dusty after a 10-mile ride, charged down upon La Soledad. The place looked so blamed peaceful that the Marshal stared pop-eyed. "Wall, I'll be doggone," says he, and let us riders traffic around innocent, tramping out all the ground sign. When he saw Cocky's memorandum on the door of the shack, he couldn't bear it any longer. "Chalkeye," says he, "I'll be doggoned if that ain't gone with the buckboard for grub, if that ain't enough to scorch a yeller dawg." "And yet," says I, "you blamed us for hanging back." "Wall," he groaned, "the drinks is on me this time. Let's go home." But I knew Jim's handwriting. I knew that he and Curly were with the buckboard. I knew that the brains of McCalmont himself were behind a play like this. I looked up the Grave City trail, the way to my ranch, the way that the buckboard had gone with my kids. "You may go home, sir," says I, "but I'm off to my home before you leads me any more astray, corrupting my pure morals." Doggone Hawkins froze me with his eyes. "If your soul," he says, "were to stray out onto your doggone cheek, it would get lost." I'm always getting misunderstood like that by people who ought to know better. You see, I had to shock old Hawkins, or he would notice at once that I aimed to follow the buckboard. "Cyclists," said I, "dog traps, sulkies, buggies, wagons, sore back horses, mules, tenderfoot. Look at yo' circus, and say if that ain't enough to corrupt a longhorn's morals. Hello, look at that!" A man was coming down from the north, lickety split on a roan with a rangy stride. He wore sombrero, shirt, chaps with streaming fringes, a brace of guns to his belt. He rode with a cowboy swing to his broad shoulders, and his face was black with rage as he pulled up facing our crowd, guns drawn for war. "Boys," he shouted, "whar's yo' sheriff?" I followed Hawkins as he rode up to confront the stranger. "I'm United States Marshal Hawkins. What's your doggone business that needs drawn guns?" "I'm Buck Hennesy, segundo to the Robbers' Roost gang of outlaws, and my guns are to shoot if I see you flirt that smoothbore." "Your business?" "State's evidence. Take it or leave it." "And who's your doggone evidence against?" "Against Captain McCalmont, Curly, his son, and 6 others, robbers, and that polecat Jim du Chesnay of Holy Cross." "Well, throw down your doggone guns, throw up your doggone hands, and say 'sir' when you dare to address an honest man. Now you get offen that horse." "Doggone Hawkins," says the robber, "I ain't no prisoner, I ain't yo' meat, I don't propose to hole up in yo' flea trap calaboose, and I quit this hawss when I'm dead. Take my talk for state's evidence, or go without." "Chalkeye," says the Marshal aside, "is he covered?" "Say the word, and I drop him." "All right. Now, Hennessy, at the first break you die. You may talk." "McCalmont's outfit," says Buck, "is breaking for Holy Cross. To morrow mawning they round up cattle, and then they drive right home to Robbers' Roost." "You're going to guide us, Mr. Doggone Robber, or get plugged as full of holes as a doggone sieve." "Guide you!" says Buck, and spat at him. "Guide you! I wouldn't be seen dead with yo' tin horn crowd of measly bedridden tourists. I cayn't insult you worse than saying that yo' mother was a sport, yo' father hung, and their offspring a skunk. Now all you deck of cowards!" He let drive with both his guns, but I shot first, and only just in time. One bullet grazed my ear, the other killed a horse, but my shot had done its work and spoiled his aim. His eyes rolled up white, his face went dead. He sat there a corpse in the saddle for maybe a minute, until I yelled, and the horse shied, and the body lurched forward, crashing to the ground, splashing a cloud of dust which was red with the sunset. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Curly by Roger Pocock. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Gerard. Chapter 21. A Flying Hospital. Captain McCalmont, away north on the trail, pulled up at a bend of the hill. "Doc," he called out to the man with the led horse astern, "jest you hitch that sorrel of mine to the tail of this rig. That's right, my son. Now find out if Buck stays at the skyline or goes butting straight back to the ranch." "All right, Cap." When he was gone, Curly rucked up the canvas ground sheet, climbed out of bed, and nestled against her father's side on the seat. "Having a bad time?" he asked, as he drove on. "Sure." "You heard what I told the Buck?" "Buck's gone back to betray the outfit." "So I reckon." Curly got her father's near arm around her, shivering while she looked all around at the dusky hills, up to the red of the sunset. Then she listened to the thud of Doc's horse as he galloped back to report. "Cap," says the man, "Buck's gone straight away to the ranch." "That's good," McCalmont chuckled. "You see, Doc, I've sent Buck to lead that sheriff's posse to Holy Cross. We've got to work tonight, and ain't hungering none for their company. Do you know the Jim Crow mine?" "I guess that's the old shaft a mile this side of Grave City." "Correct. Now you lope off to the boys we left in camp at Las Aguas. Tell Stanley he's second in command now. He's to round up his boys, herd 'em close, and drive 'em swift to the Jim Crow mine. Now repeat my orders." Doc repeated the orders. "Now," said the captain, "ride." Doc started off on the dead run, and for a while Curly watched his figure flopping away into the blue mists of dusk. The night was falling fast. "Po' Buck," she whispered. "I'm sorry too," says McCalmont. "Sooner or later he had to be a skunk, and behave as such." "He's dead," says Curly. "I heard him die just now, and he did love me so hard." "The trail is clearing ahead for you, my girl." "I'm sort of tired," she answered. "You'll rest tonight." "Father, when you was talking with Jim outside the shack, I was awake. I heard all what was said, but couldn't understand. Jim wanted something fearful bad. What was it he wanted, Dad?" "Wall now, if that don't beat all. You just got ears like a little fox. And didn't I act plumb good and tame with that Jim boy?" "Which you surely did. Fancy you talking all that war talk and never even shooting his legs. You're getting better and better every day." "I was good, that's a fact. You see, I naturally couldn't lose my temper without disturbing you with my gun talk. Besides, I just can't help loving that Jim. You want him, Curly?" "Sure. I don't know what's coming over me the way I feels at that man. It seems as though my heart was pitching and bucking like a mean hoss to get at Jim. Do you think it's this wound that tears my heart? Is it 'cause I'm so sick?" "It's worse nor that, my girl. You've fallen in love." "Does that mean I got to marry him?" "That's the only cure." "But I don't want to be cured. I like it, Dad, and when it hurts I like it all the more." "A sure bad symptom, that. You'll go with Jim?" "To the end of the world and over the edge. I can't help that." "You don't love me any more?" "Oh, you're allus the same, like the climate, but he's come butting along like the weather, so that I feel as if I was just whirled up in the air. I was an idiot to think I could fool old Nature and make you into a man. Well, it can't be helped. Daddy, I never was fit to ride with the gang, and I doubt I'll never be fit for a woman either. Now, I'm shorely tired, and my haid goes round and round." McCalmont stopped the team and laid Curly down in her nest. He told me after that he felt lonesome and scared, with all his nerves a jumping for fear there was something worse than usual wrong. He felt Curly's bandages, and his hand got wet, then listened, and heard a drip, drip, drip on the dust, then struck a match and saw the running blood, for her wound had opened. He had to light a lantern, no matter what the risk. while he stopped that bleeding. Meanwhile, the Marshal had started his circus east toward Holy Cross, and he was having troubles most plentiful with all his warriors. He held us in the name of the Republic for special service in pursuit of robbers, but his tenderfoot outfit was badly in want of supper, and the cowboy people got plumb disgusted at having to ride, point, swing, and drive on a herd of shorthorns. I'd shown my hand in this game by shooting buck, the same being needful to save the old Marshal's life, and I sure helped him all I knew in getting the posse on towards Holy Cross. At the same time my private feelings called me off to quite a different layout, and I knew, all to myself, that Buck might have been mistaken a whole lot in his way of reckoning up McCalmont's plans. So I fell back to give a push to some stragglers, then fell back again to see if there was any more belated pilgrims behind. The light had faded, the stars were beginning to ride herd on the Milky Way, and I felt a sort of dumb yearning to find McCalmont. An hour later, scouting swift and cautious up the Grave City road, I saw a lantern bobbing high up among the hills. That must be a bait, I thought, to lure the Marshal's posse into some robber's deadfall, so I rode slow, and sang my simple ring songs to show it was only me, one harmless person. It be like go long, little doggy, you'll make a beef steer by and by. That's the rear song for driving a herd. This is nonsense. Two little niggers upstairs in bed. One turned over to the udder and said, "How about that shortening bread? How about that shortening bread?" A voice called out of the dark, "Throw up your hands." Up went my paws. "Hello, boys," I shouted. "Is this the inquiry office? I wants my visiting card sent up to Cap McCalmont." Somebody laughed, and then I heard Jim's voice. "Why, it's Chalkeye." "Well, if he don't want to be shot, he'd better turn right back." "Just you tell yo' hold ups, Jim," says I, "that them leaden go through pills don't suit my delicate health." I dropped my hands, and the first robber asked Jim if he would answer for me. Jim said he would. "Take this man through," said the robber, and Jim led me, mighty pleased, to where the lantern shone. "Captain," says he, "here's old Chalkeye." McCalmont jumped down from the buckboard, holding out his lantern. "Wall," says he, "I'm glad to see you, Misteh Davies." "I certainly am. Shake hearty. Whar you from?" "Is Curly with you?" "Here's me," came a faint chirp out of the bedding. "Her wound broke out again," says McCalmont. "Her wound!" I howled. "Wall, that cat is shorely spilled," says McCalmont, and so I knew for the first time that my Curly wasn't a boy, but come of a different breed of people altogether. I slid from my horse and sat down on a rock to unravel my mixed emotions. "If that's the truth," I says, "I suppose I may turn out to be a widow, the same being some confusing to the mind." "Wall, Mrs. Davies," says McCalmont, "I was going to propose that you act as a sort of chaperone to Curly." "I rise to inquire," says I, "if that's some new kind of mountain sheep." The name was new to me, and I felt suspicious. "A mountain sheep," says McCalmont, "is a cimarron, but a chaperone's defined as a party which rides herd on girls to protect them in society." "Meaning that this carousing around in a waggon ain't good for wounds?" "Not when the hawspital has to gallop over rocks." "Seems to me," says I, "that right apart from bullet holes in a lady, he'll need home comforts more'n an ordinary robber." "Can you take Curly home then?" "I'm getting unpopular," says I. "My home ain't fortified much." I rolled a cigarette to think with. "Whereas I got some cousins which is ladies, the Mrs. Jameson. Their home is just the other side of the Jim Crow mine, between that and Grave City, and they has a fancy for stray cats, dogs, and outcasts generally. Seems to me, though, they'd be mighty near surprised if I played a wounded robber on them, calling the same a female. They ain't broke into lady outlaws damaged in gunfights yet. They're plumb respectable, and frequents the Episcopal Church. The bishop boards thar when he happens around, and they'll take up with any litter of passing curates." "I'm scart," says Curly. "Cayn't you bed me down in yo' barn?" "You'll go whar you're told," says McCalmont, "and stay put until you're well enough to fight." "If you're scared, Curly," says I, "these same ladies is due to have fits at the sight of your present costume. Now, if I could show them a case like you in the Bible, they'd think it right natural, and all correct." "Absalom," says Curly, "had long hair. So does Buffalo Bill, Texas Bob, and other old longhorns, but the same ain't lady robbers. Besides, your hair is short, and you're plumb unusual." "I got a trunk full of female plunder," says McCalmont, "and it's right here in the buckboard, in case he needs to dress respectable." "It's all torn to rags," says Curly, "from that last b'ar hunt when I was treed by a grizzly, and the wig got stuck full of pine gum." "These details of female dress in department," McCalmont was getting restive, "seems to me to be some frivolous. The question is, do these yere ladies run much to tongue?" "Wall, no. The fashionable society of Grave City has struck them reticent. Miss Blossom says she'd rather mix up with b'ars, and Miss Pansy she allows our crowd lacks tone. No, these ladies don't go henning around to cackle." "That settles it," said McCalmont. "Now you, Jim, you go back and tell these boys to join the herders in front, and I'll be with you presently. It ain't decent, my boy, for you to behold what's going to happen in the way of costume. So you jest tell Curly good bye, and we'll proceed with disguising her as a woman." "When shall I see Curly again?" asked Jim in a fright. "At such time when he's fit to ride. Now tell yo' good bye." So Jim and Curly had a minute together, while I helped McCalmont to get out the trunk of clothes. Then Jim rode off for the sake of decency, and I turned my back. There were arguments between McCalmont and Curly about how the female costume should be fixed. The parent wanted one side to the front, and the dutiful child insisted otherwise. When I was told to look, there was Curly grinning in surroundings of yellow wig, the same being bunched up behind like a clump of prickly pear. McCalmont rigged himself out in his preacher clothes, cinched up his sorrel horse at the tail of the buckboard, and tied his cowboy gear to the strings of the saddle. He turned to watch Jim and the robbers file past on their way to the front, then gave me his lantern. "My friend," says he, "when you go to the home of them ladies, drive straight acrost the open range to the back door. Be thar before midnight, and if you love yo' life, don't stray out on the wagon road between the Jim Crow Mine and Grave City. If you do, you'll get killed for sure." "What shall I do with the buckboard?" "Lose it somewhars whar it ain't apt to be found. Turn them team hawsses loose and let them break for their home, as they shorely will." "And when Curly is well of this wound?" "Then Jim will join you, and you'll take them children to some safe country, so that they get married and forget this life. We planned all that before." "You trust me still?" "It looks that way, my friend, and I don't trust by halves." He gripped my hand and went loping away into the night. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Curly by Roger Pocock. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Matt Perard. Chapter 22. Robbery Under Arms. In those days of our little unpleasantness in Arizona, there was another discussion proceeding along in South Africa. The Boers had their tail up, and the British Army was indulging itself in regrettable incidents about once a week, which I allude to here because the word regrettable incident is good. It's soothing. and it illustrates exactly what it happened on the night when I delivered Curly, damaged but cheerful, among my cousins, the Misses Jameson. Just to the east of the home inhabited by these ladies occurs the Jim Crow mine, the same being the very place where the robbers once had breakfast with old man Ryan, making him pay the bill, as aforesaid, which was $75,000, and annoying. On this further occasion, which I now unfold, there were only 4 men working the Jim Crow claim. It seems they were in the bunkhouse playing poker until 11 p.m., when their foreman uprose with regrets to surrender his hat, boots, and pants to an avaricious person holding 3 aces and a pair of jacks. The foreman's warm communications on the subject of cheating were then cut off short by a masked robber standing in the doorway with guns. This robber proposed that all gentlemen present should throw up their hands, and allowed they had a fervent invitation to die unless they stepped out pretty soon to the head of the Jim Crow shaft. Accordingly, the sad procession trailed away to the shaft, and one by one the mourners went down in a bucket to a total depth of 104 feet. Then the robber hauled up the bucket to keep them from straying out, and promised faithful that if he heard any noise he would just drop in a few sticks of dynamite. There was not much noise. Meanwhile, other earnest young robbers were collecting every citizen who passed the mine, and inviting him to join their surprise party down at the foot of the shaft. The citizens all accepted, and when some candles, a deck of cards, and a few bottles of nose paint were sent to assist, the levee underground began to get quite a success. Mixed in with these proceedings, and other hold ups various and swift, was the Chinese cook with a robber holding his tail while he fixed supper for 25 men. Afterwards he likewise was handed down the shaft. I should also mention a preacher in a black suit and a white tie up under his ear, projecting around among the store shed for cases of dynamite. At 12:30 a bunch of cowboys numbering 18 head, with a cavyard of ponies, trailed in off the range. After each man had roped and saddled a fresh horse, and fed corn to the same, the reverend pastor put out a relief of sentries, and told the crowd to line up in the rampasture for supper. Naturally these people had to get the provisions off their minds before there was any talk, but then the preacher reared up to address the meeting. "Brethren," says he, "look a here." The new segundo, Black Stanley, started in obstreperous, backed by a dozen men, all seething. "I represents this outfit in starting to buck right now. Turn yo'self loose. We all has come to an understanding that we ain't a going to fool around here any more. These is mean pastures, and we breaks for home." "That's what's the matter." A lot of robbers began to come to a crisis. "Misteh Stanley, son," says McCalmont, "you air a judge of rye whiskey, and a natural born leader of men." The boys began to laugh. "Now," says McCalmont, "all you boys who yearns to get quit of me, and have this judge of rye and natural born leader of men to be their chief, will arise and join his herd. Yo' hosses are at the door, so trail yo' spurs along the floor and go." Not a man moved. "You, Black Stanley, take yo'self and yo' followers and get absent quick from this camp, 'cause the rest of us has business." Stanley, getting to feel a whole lot lonesome, just dropped his tail and submitted. "Chief," says he, "I take it all back. I made you my segundo, Stanley, and you've proved yo'self mighty sudden. I reduce you to the ranks. You, Bowlegs, act as second in command. And now to business. First, I want to instill into your dim and clouded intellects that when a member of the gang is captured he has to be rescued. The captured man was my son, and 17 skunks of you hung fire when I asked for his rescue. These 17 said skunks is fined half their shares of plunder in the next rating, the same to be paid to those who do most work. Second, the man who rescued my son is Jim du Chesnay here." The captain laid his hand upon Jim's shoulder. "He is my guest, and as he's not a member of this ordinary low flung herd, you don't want to tell him awdehs, or oppress him, or stuff his head with any of yo' dreams. I've a mind to muzzle a few pet liars right now. The special liars I see grinning is the ones I allude to particular. Now you all is a mighty sight wide of being perfect thieves. You has weaknesses, some for bad liquor, some for small mean thefts. Most of you showing yourselves off 'sif you was buck devils, which you shorely ain't. Tonight I propose you fast from such like vanities, and attend strictly to business. Moreover, as some of you ain't got no more sense than a poached cat, I now explains this warpath, lest ye get wandering around after the wrong scalp. The object of this virtuous night is to steal a millionaire which goes by the name of Michael Ryan, and holes up in a palace cyar on the railroad sidings. If you get him in reasonable preservation, we realise lots of wealth for his ransom, but any blame fool who spoils him with loose ammunition is robbing his partners of their lawful dues." And so, having tamed his wolves, McCalmont gave the orders for the night. Right here I bubble over with remarks on the art of being a villain. Now this Captain McCalmont wasn't a good man exactly, it being his humble vocation to steal everything in sight and shoot any party who happened to get in the way. He was a sure enough scoundrel, and yet Curly just loved him frantic. Jim trusted him body and soul. I was mighty proud of having his friendship. All his wolves were tame as little children when he led them. Every cowboy on the range would have shared his last drop of water with old McCalmont, and even the victims he robbed would speak of him mostly as a perfect gentleman. When he laid a trap, that same deadfall looked a whole lot attractive and comforting. "Excuse me," says McCalmont, springing the steel jaws on his victim. "I hope you're not feeling hurt." Now, if McCalmont had looked like one of them villains I see at the theatre, scowling, threatening, lurid, mean-eyed scareheads, he wouldn't have seen the victim's tail for dust. No, he wasn't like a villain, he was like a man, a white man at that, and when he gave a show it was worth any man's money to see. Just watch his play. Grave City was a plenty big city to attack. It could turn out 300 riders, anyway, and that mighty sudden, too, in case of robbers. McCalmont had to attack with 24 outlaws, and get them away without any holes through their hides. Along towards 1 in the morning, the stableman at Ryan's livery met with an accident, being clubbed. Then a couple of men walked round the stalls, loosed all the horses, and drove the whole outfit away through the back gate. The same proceedings occurred at the spur livery, and in all the large stables, until 200 head of good stock were gathered and run off to the northward. In Main Street, hitched to the snubbing posts, stood a score of saddled horses, awaiting patient to take their drunkards home. These poor creatures were cared for tender by a young man who went along casual, feeding them a bunch of dry herbs, the same being loco weed, and a heaps powerful medicine. Now we turn to the railroad station, where the main game was being played. At 1 a.m. the night operator in the depot remembered all of a sudden that the lady clerk, Miss Brumble, at Contention, had wired him to send on a parcel of stockings by number 4. The night freight train was pulling out at that time, so he ran across the platform and pitched the parcel into the caboose as the cars went rolling past him. "Miss Brumble's socks," says he. "All correct," says the conductor, and the train went rumbling off into the desert. Then the night operator, which his name was Bowles, turned round to point back for his office, and suddenly trod on a preacher. "Pardon me," says the reverend stranger. "Oh, don't mention it," says the clerk, some sarcastic. "Excuse me, seh, may I venture to well, what's the matter with you?" "My poor lost brother. I am wishful to be informed of Mr. Michael Ryan." "He's in his car. I'm busy." "Oh, but my dear young friend, these profane cowboys are using such fearful language, because Mr. Ryan refuses to see them, being gone to bed." The operator turned on his heel, and turned off growling. "You see," the preacher wailed after him, "they've got a robber." The operator began to nibble the bait. "Robber?" He swung round sudden. "What robber?" "The erring young person is called James du Chesnay." "They got him? Great snakes!" "Yes, in bondage. They want to be rewarded with earthly dross, instead of seeking for the blessings and comfort which alone " "And Ryan won't come out?" "I think, seh, that Mr. Ryan is timid because of the shocking profanity of these misguided men, breaking his windows too. Let me admonish you, my brother, to eschew the company of all " "I'll fix him," says the operator, and charged along down the platform with the preacher suffering after him. That night operator, Mr. Mose Bowles, surging along the platform to Ryan's car, would have bet his last dollar that the facts were true. He saw three sure enough cowboys sitting their horses easy in front of the private car, and the preacher was plumb correct about the way they talked. Bowles saw the prisoner, bound hand and foot, on a led horse, and that was Jim beyond all doubt, looking plenty discouraged. Bowles knew that Ryan had offered rewards most bounteous for Jim's body. He hungered for a portion of the plunder, and when he swung himself up the platform on the end of the car, his batterings on the door was full of enthusiasm. "I fear," says the preacher, "that you're spoiling the paint. Take thought, my friend, how expensive is paint like that." The cowboys were backing their horses away beyond range of the car lamps, out of sight. "Mr. Ryan," Bowles shouted, "urgent telegram. Come out." A nigger porter slid open an inch of the door. "You go 'way," says he. "Mass Ryan, he plumb distractful. Go 'way." "Let me in, you fool!" Bowles wrenched the door wide open and jumped into the car. Then there were mutterings and voices, the lighting up of the far end of the Pullman, and after a while came a fat young man bustling out on the platform. He wore a fur coat, bare legs, and slippers, cussing around most peevish. "'Scuse me," says the preacher, "I am an unworthy minister, a ticular Baptist, and I could not hear the fearful profanity of these rude men without shedding tears. May I escort you, sir, to see this prisoner?" Bowles and the negro stood on the car platform watching, while the preacher led Ryan off into starlight. "My heart quakes at the fear that these cowboys have gone away. Please stick this way, and 'ware stumbling on these sidings. This way, Mr. Ryan, this way." The voice died away, and Bowles was putting out to follow, when all of a sudden he and the negro were seized from behind, gagged, roped, and generally detained. Off among the sidings Mr. Ryan had a gag in his mouth, a rope round his elbows, then felt himself caught up into the starlight and thrown on a horse while his feet were hobbled under the animal's belly. In the station a robber was playing tunes with an axe on the keys of the telegraph, and the wires were being lopped with a pair of shears. Speaking generally, a whole lot of silence was being procured, and from a robber point of view things worked harmonious until the first bunch of riders went thundering away into the desert. As it happened, the City Marshal and his deputy, Shorty Broach, straying into these premises to send off a telegram, found the operator and the negro lying gagged and bound on the platform. So when they heard the robbers loping off, they sized up the whole situation. They were just too late to get robbers, but plenty swift in turning out the town. This news of a fresh outrage hit old Grave City sudden, surprising, right in the middle of sleep time. and the whole town swarmed out instant like a hornet's nest for war. Some of the people were full of sleep, others were full of whiskey. Some had their war paint, some had a blanket, but all of them felt they were spat on. All of them howled for vengeance. For a whole week the town tribe and the range tribe had been at war, and here was some idiot making a howl about robbers. This was certainly another case of cowboys in town, and the verdict was sudden, to lynch the cowboy leader, Mr. Chalkeye Davies. It being some expedient first to catch this Chalkeye, these warriors began to make haste and get mounted for pursuit. But from the first things seemed to go wrong, for one after another the horses which had been standing in the street went jumping, roaring crazy, pulling back till their reins broke, bucking off their saddles, whirling around the town, and stampeding away to the desert. The people saw that loco weed had been prevailing over the plain sense of these animals. Then they found the stables an aching solitude, and the telegraph wrecked to prevent them calling for help, and everything done thoughtful and considerate by felonious parties unknown who had stolen the only millionaire in Arizona. Soon they remembered there had been a whole lot of unpleasantness between Mr. Ryan and Chalkeye. Thus the more they considered, the more their noses went sideways of the truth, smelling the poisonous iniquities of this Chalkeye outlaw. The town was left afoot, and yet from private stables horses were raked up, enough to mount a posse of 30 men. By this time it was too late to chase, but the Marshal reckoned that, with the shine of bicycle lamps, he could track until daylight and keep on the robbers' trail until he got more help. He never ruminated on the thoughtful, prophetic way in which these motions were foreseen. Just abreast of the Jim Crow mine, the leading horse of that posse blew up with a loud bang, and Shorty Broach was projected into a prickly pear bush. That is how he got his new pseudonym, which is Pincushion Shorty to the present day. On the whole, that posse concluded to go home rather than face a pavement of live dynamite. End of chapter 22.